There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Connor Wold, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Oscar Showdown. And this week we're going to be continuing our look at the Best Actor category, looking at the 1980s decade, looking at every single winner of the Best Lead Actor category from the Academy Awards that year, and tier ranking them from S to D tier. Not necessarily 1 from 10, but S being the highest, D being the lowest, and then certain movies can be in the same sort of tier of similar level. We've been doing a lot from this series. We've already covered all the Best Picture movies and ranked them, and we've already done the 2010s all the way to the 90s of the Best Actor winners and ranked them. Then next week we're going to be covering the 70s Best Actor winners. So 70s, one of the best Oscar decades of all time. And then once we're done with that, we're not going to go to the 60s Best Actor. We're going to go to Best Actress of the 2010s, and then go from 2010s to the 70s, and then once again with the supporting actor and actress categories, and then we'll be done with the series. So I hope you guys have been enjoying it so far. Please make sure to comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the rankings, what your tier rankings, personal tier rankings are, how they differ from mine. I love to hear that kind of stuff. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more videos. But without further ado, let's jump into things. Starting off with the 1980 winner, Robert De Niro for Raging Bull, which is a total iconic performance, and I think for a lot of people is one of the best performances of all time. It's in many ways indicative of the types of Oscar winners that we have today. You know, we've talked about in Old Oscar Countdown in the 2010s Best Actor episode how I think it was something like 7 out of the 10 winners were actors playing real life people, which is just absolutely insane. The fact that to win an Oscar, at least for a lead actor, but I think it's also true in actress categories as well, playing a real life person is the sort of thing to do. Now in the 80s, the Raging Bull, Robert De Niro influence wasn't copied necessarily. I mean, we get a lot of winners based on original characters. However, its influences, I think, is undeniable in how we view sort of what good acting is. You know, I think for a lot of people, this is one of the key performances of all time. That's what good acting is. You have to transform. You have to be someone different. I think you have to lose a lot of weight. You have to, gain weight. And that doesn't necessarily always mean it's a good performance. I mean, oftentimes it doesn't, just because you're doing the work. But that reality does, I think, add to the genuine nature of the performance. So sometimes you look at this performance and you go, people got the wrong things, took the wrong lessons from this movie, but sometimes you go, well, that's not this movie's fault. You know, this is a terrific performance, and the sort of transformation that this movie does actually makes sense for its character, because this is not necessarily one of the greatest boxing movies of all time. The way I look at it is, it's one of the best movies in which someone's a boxer. See, Jake LaMotta was a real-life boxer, but the story is less so about boxing directly. It's more about the man himself, his anger, his rage, his self-hatred, his jealousy. He's that kind of a man who also happens to box, and of course the boxing scenes are very metaphorical, and that's how he sort of displays his self-hatred and his anger towards others, and sort of shows that off. At least that's how it's framed within the film. And I just saw the movie again. They put it in the theaters for a 4K re-release, and it's just stunning. I think it's an incredible film, one of Martin Scorsese's absolute best. And at the center is De Niro and his terrific performance. Just that sort of struggle of a boxer of wanting to lose weight, and then trying to cut weight, and then at the end of it he actually gains all the weight. So weight is a very central idea to the film because he's a boxer. But of course the relationships and jealousy and cheating and love are central to the movie as well. And I think De Niro is able to capture all of that in his performance, because he's not just this angry man. He's not just this bull in the china shop. He's a man who oftentimes simmers and bottles up his emotions before he explodes. You can see him, De Niro, sort of processing it in the scene where he'll ask Joe Pesci, "Did you sleep with my wife? Did you do it? Just tell me." And you see it sort of build and build before it absolutely explodes. It's not just one note. It's the complexities of anger, but really self-hatred as displayed through anger. He doesn't like himself. He doesn't like the situation. He doesn't like how he's being treated, so that he expresses himself by that sort of self-anger and that self-hatred, putting that hatred and that anger onto others. And it truly is just an explosive performance, and De Niro at his absolute best. So an S-tier performance for me. Then Henry Fonda in On Golden Pond, and this movie had a real strange stranglehold on the Oscars for this year, and I think is a perfect case of sort of Hollywood nepotism and insiderism. You know, you think, what? Why is this, old movie about people in a cabin? Why did this win 3 Oscars and was nominated for all these awards? And then you go, oh yeah, that's right, because the types of people that vote on these awards at the time, very old Hollywood people, of course they would like this movie because it has these 2 Hollywood legends, and Katharine Hepburn and Henry Fonda, and of course Jane Fonda plays the daughter to this older man in the movie, but of course their daughter's father in real life as well, so there's a little meta aspect to it. But when you just look at the movie itself, to me, it was just a very strange movie in which there's very little drama. It's very slow moving. Its only sort of exciting part of the movie is when a fishing boat crashes into a rock. So that's the sort of level of excitement that you get within this movie. I don't think its themes are explored very well in terms of getting old and feeling irrelevant. There's just not enough drama. There's not enough stakes to it. And then there's some stuff with the Jane Fonda character sort of hating her father, but that doesn't come until the sort of very end of the movie and it's sort of explained away in one scene. And the unfortunate element, I think, is just that Henry Fonda, like we talked about last week with Jack Nicholson, As Good as It Gets, plays an unlikable character. And you can be an unlikable character if the movie knows you're unlikable, or if the movie's trying to convince you that you actually are likable, that you're just a little bit of a grump, and then we get to learn that over the time. But I never sort of made that jump. I never made the jump of, I actually like this guy. He was a tough guy, but actually he's a nice guy now. I never was able to sort of totally overcome that. And to me, it's just a sort of a boring, slow-moving drama that doesn't have enough dramatic tension for me to stay interested. And it was a little bit frustrating watch because of that. So listen, I like that Henry Fonda has an Oscar, but let's be honest, this is not one of his best. So for me, it's just going to have to go into the D tier. Just a miss in terms of my personal taste. Then 1982, we have Ben Kingsley and Gandhi. Gandhi's a movie we've already covered in the 80s Best Picture episode, so I won't go too into depth into it, but I do think Kingsley is at the heart of why the movie succeeds and why the movie's terrific. That I like the performance even more so than I like the movie, because very few actors can be an old man, but then also a young college student, right out of law school. And Kingsley, I think, is able to really convincingly play both. There's neither young or old that I don't think he's able to convincingly do well in terms of some of the wisdom that he has older versus more of the passion, the experiences as a younger man, and that transformation is evident. And the reason really why I think the movie ultimately succeeds is because of Gandhi as a central character and Ben Kingsley's ability to bring that human emotion to it. That he's not just this big iconic figure, but that he's a real person who has beliefs but still makes mistakes and doesn't necessarily know how to go about things and has flaws himself. And I think Gandhi brings that sort of relatability and that humanity to him just by his approach, his physicality, his eyes, I think, are really terrific and a key part of the performance within this film. So for the range and age, the humanity he brings, and the sort of transformation that Kingsley's able to do, for me, his performance as Gandhi is A-tier stuff. Then the 1983 winner, Robert Duvall, for Tender Mercies, which is a movie I saw 4 years ago now when I covered it on the Forgotten Oscar Film series. So a movie I didn't really know anything about, but decided to cover it for Forgotten Oscar Films and really enjoy the film, and it was a great find for me in how much I just enjoyed it. And rewatched it again in preparation for this episode because it had been 4 years, and the movie is great and Robert Duvall is great. Sometimes the movie's okay, but the performance is great. This is one of those great scenarios where the movie is really terrific, but so is her lead character. And because he's a lead character and really the sort of draw of the movie in my mind, he has to be good. There's no way in which this is a great movie and he's bad. It just doesn't work that way. They're so sort of intimately tied. And what at first seems to be a story about sort of an alcoholic country singer or a romance between him and this sort of motel owner, I think almost the romance part and that sort of part is pretty quick within the movie. Really within the sort of 20-30 minutes, we get that out of the way. They get married, they're sort of living a good life, because that's not really what the movie's about. The movie's about your old relationships coming back to threaten your new life that you've built, your old desires, your old habits. How is that going to threaten or work its way into this new life that you've built? In this case, a sober life, a good life, sort of a happy home. those relationships aren't just going to go away forever. In this case, Robert Duvall being a famous country singer with, a past kid, so there's complications there. And, that's sort of those themes of the movie, that sort of thinking of, I want to be a new man, and this is the new life that I've built, and I don't want sort of my past to haunt me. All that sort of thinking and that concern and that anxiety, that stoicism is all conveyed through Robert Duvall's face. And this is a man that isn't going to be super expressive, that's going to have all these monologues. So it makes sense why he's stoic or poetic. He's a sort of a tough-living country singer that's got sort of the heart of an artist, and we see him more sensitive when it comes to some of his art. We see him more caring with his new stepson, but we see how he can even, in the little glimpses that we do get of his past life as a country singer, we see how he was and how he's able to sort of snap on a dime and get frustrated, and how he's trying to work through that and still gets offended if maybe his songs aren't as good in the creative process there, or still wanting to sort of help out young fans. Duvall's able to sort of play a man with a past and tell us everything we need to know about that past without actually giving us a huge monologue about it. Those themes are communicated through his being. And then, of course, that works so well because the character is this sort of stoic country singer, so it works well in that regard too. So I think Duvall just plays his performance to a T. So for me, it's A-tier stuff. Then the 1984 winner F. Murray Abraham for Amadeus, another movie we've talked about, but we didn't necessarily go in depth in F. Murray Abraham, so I want to do that here now, because when I think about the movie, I think about his performance, it's interesting because this is not Mozart. Of course, it's kind of a biopic about Mozart, but seen through Salieri's eyes, and this character is so much what the movie is about and all the themes of the movie. And Tom Hulce is great as Mozart, and I'm glad he got nominated, but I do think the Academy made the right choice in giving it to F. Murray, because this is a time in the world in which posturing was so important, in which your sort of way you present yourself and your sort of civilities that you have with conversations weren't necessarily true. You weren't telling your true self. You were faking it. You are putting on a front. But of course, we know exactly what Salieri is thinking. There's so many reaction shots to him, just sort of prowling around, looking at Mozart, admiring him, being jealous, damning God for putting this great talent in such a childish boy's hands, because Salieri does have that ability to seem prim and proper, but Mozart isn't able to have that kind of ability, that sort of social filter that Salieri has, and he's sort of jealous of that in many ways, and jealous of his talent, but also admiring of it. So the fact that F. Murray is able to communicate all these feelings, all these themes throughout the movie, even though oftentimes his dialogue, what he says, is not that, it's just incredible. He's able to say certain things and keep up this prim and proper persona and have all this posturing, but simultaneously communicate to the audience his jealousy, his rage, his anger. Of course, we do have some of those scenes where they're more clearly communicated to us, but so much of those scenes are still communicated just through reaction shots of F. Murray Abraham, and just an incredible ability to communicate those themes through facial reactions. Excellent performance, and for me, an S-tier performance. Then we have William Hurt in Kiss of a Spider-Woman, and when you look at the winners from this decade, Paul Newman, Robert De Niro, Daniel Day-Lewis, Dustin Hoffman, Henry Fonda, I mean, you could say those are 5 of the 10 best actors of all time, and they're all winners from this decade. And yet you have William Hurt amongst this group here too, and he's one of the more fascinating actors I've looked at and I've covered as well on the channel, because his 80s were so dominant and he was so well celebrated at his time, even though a lot of his movies haven't been well celebrated in modern day sense. Body Heat, Altered States, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, Children of Lesser God, The Accidental Tourist. These are all movies that were really well celebrated at the time, but have sort of an unknown/middling reputation in modern day film culture. So it's interesting to sort of go back and see what was so appealing to audiences from the 80s at the time of William Hurt. And I think it's because he has this sort of leading man face and body and charm, but oftentimes uses that for stranger movies. Altered States is this body horror sci-fi kind of a movie, and Body Heat, of course, being an erotic thriller, sort of a psychological kind of a movie, and then even Kiss of a Spider-Woman here, playing a gay, flamboyant man. It's very over the top. It's very different than what his traditional looks and persona may portray. And I think for many regards, the reason why he won this performance is because of the sort of flamboyant aspect of his character that allows him to be over the top, that allows him to be different than what William Hurt is known as. And it does work in part, particularly some of the storytelling scenes, that sort of over the top grandiosity works very well for the movie, but then other times in some of the more serious moments becomes a little bit less successful. So I think, you know, overall a mixed bag performance for me, definitely not disastrous, but mixed bag, so it goes into the C tier. Then Paul Newman in The Color of Money, which when I actually did a rewatch, I'd seen the movie, I remember 6-7 years ago, I did a rewatch in anticipation for this episode, and I was just surprised at how my memory portrayed me. I think my memory in the sort of traditional narrative was always, oh, this is the movie in which Newman passes off the movie star belt to Tom Cruise and says, hey kid, you're the next thing. But really when you watch the movie, it's a total puff piece for Paul Newman. It's not that. You know, his character gets the redemption arc. His character comes back and, spoiler, beats Tom Cruise in a way in the final match. He's the guy that sort of comes back and becomes a great pool player again. He has the arc. It's not Cruise. It really is no sort of transferring. If anything, it's a vanity piece kind of by Newman, at least the way I saw it on the rewatch, which actually kind of hurt my appreciation of the film. That being said, I think Newman still is solid in the movie. You know, it's not the Verdict level, you know, where he was S tier stuff. You know, I wish he would have won for that movie. But instead he won for this movie. And he's, I think, more solid, at least my viewpoint, in the mentor scenes when he's actually trying to mentor Vincent, Tom Cruise's character, and he's maybe quick to anger because he was like that at times and sort of clearly understands it, but he can't get Vincent to always understand it. He's an emotional guy, so he causes problems that way, but he's still very charming and very smart and knows the hustle and knows how to do things. He's trying to pass on that sort of intelligence and gamesmanship to Vincent. I think his character works less so in the sort of I'm back scenes of him being a great pool player again, but he still is able to show his acting chops because Newman's an incredible actor in things like the Forrest Whitaker Amos scene, or even the small moment in which he wins the match, goes outside, yells, and then comes back. So the small sort of instances there to really show the humanity of his character. So a solid performance, even though this rewatch I actually almost liked it a little bit less because it seemed a little bit more like a vanity project than it was a passing of the reins. So for me, it goes into the B tier. Then the 1987 winner, Michael Douglas for Wall Street. What I love on this channel is performances creating iconic roles. And I think this is an iconic performance, an iconic role. Before Jordan Belfort, before Patrick Bateman, there was Gordon Gekko. And this American Wall Street, American stockbroker, financier, that sort of stereotype was defined by Michael Douglas in this movie. Not only is the greed is good speech iconic still today, but it's iconic in part because of his performance. Now, Oliver Stone did a great job writing that speech in the entire movie, but Douglas's way to really sell it to us, you know, his intelligence, it radiates. It's clear that this guy is a smart man, and just his sort of direct, calculated, sort of attentive way of speaking to draw you in and make it seem clear and plain and simple in this really smart way, even though maybe the topics and the ideas are corrupt and ethically dubious. When Douglas delivers them, it makes you want to sort of, you know, run into a wall for the guy. He really do believe that this is the smart, the intellectual, the logical way of doing things because of how calculated he is in his performance. And yet Douglas is also able to portray some of the predatory aspects of the character, that he's waiting for this good scoop. He's waiting for Charlie Sheen to corrupt him, to try to get information out of him, to absolutely win, and that's what he's obsessed with, winning. But in terms of the emotional stakes of the story, so much of it is us believing that the Charlie Sheen character would idolize Gordon Gekko. Why is this guy so fascinating? Well, when we actually do meet him, and credit to Douglas' performance, we totally understand why. Because he's intelligent, because he's charming, and because he's able to sort of lay things out in a simple, plain, clear way that you can't help in terms of his rhythm of speaking. You can't help but feel compelled to it. And because you feel compelled to it, and because you understand now why Charlie Sheen is so obsessed with this man, you understand the emotional stakes of the character and of the story, and you get involved into it. So Douglas is not only great for his part, he's actually doing something that's to the betterment of the story. So for creating an iconic character as well, for me, this is S tier stuff. 1988, Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. This is a movie that we've talked about in the Best Picture episode as well, and it's a movie that probably, and this performance in particular, probably wouldn't be done the same way in 2023. But judging it from a 1988 perspective, I think Dustin Hoffman is absolutely solid in this movie. I think the script is great. I think Tom Cruise is a secret MVP, but let's not be naive and say that the reason why this movie probably won Best Picture was because of Dustin Hoffman. He delivers a lot of the comedic elements of the film, and just because of the way he delivers these lines, and I think the fact that autism hasn't really been displayed in movies prior to this time, so there was sort of a new and bold factor of this movie, even if maybe the portrayal of the condition doesn't necessarily meet modern day standards. You have to still look at it from an 80s perspective. And I think what I can only judge is not its accuracy of autism, but Hoffman's performance and his total commitment to it. There's never a moment where he slips up or he doesn't feel like this person. He feels like Raymond. He feels like someone who does have autism in his tics, in his patterns. There's never something that you go, at least from a viewer, go, this is inconsistent with how he's been portraying as a character before. The character is clear and understandable, and he I think breathes a sense of humanity to him, because he's not going so over the top and being so strange. He's a strange man, but his tics are consistent, and Hoffman's portrayal of the character is absolutely consistent throughout the film. I also think that Hoffman's and his delivery of the lines, while not supposed to be funny within the context of the movie, are very funny. His timing is absolutely perfect. Raymond doesn't know he's being funny, but he is in the movie, just because of how Hoffman is a performer. Perfectly nails the lines, perfectly has that timing, just to wait that 1 second beat before delivering the line at the most inopportune time, like when they go to the airport and of course he doesn't fly, or when they talk about Kmart, or even the matchstick scene at the restaurant. There are some iconic moments in this movie, and a lot of that is because of Hoffman's performance. So I think he's got great chemistry with Cruise, very funny, very consistent, and there's lots of props to Hoffman for there. I'm going to give it a B tier performance ranking. And then finally, 1989, DayLewis for My Left Foot. And he's one of the greatest actors of all time just because of the range. Because you think of this performance, then you think of Lincoln, or you think of There Will Be Blood. And they're all so wildly different, but they're all so great. And what I think the genius of this performance is that DayLewis is able to capture the emotions of this man. Because, listen, it's very impressive that an able-bodied man in DayLewis is able to portray someone with this disability. Christy Brown, the painter and writer, who's only able to use and have control of the toes in his left foot, which he did, so much with, and it's an incredible, inspiring story. And DayLewis is portraying a man with ALS very convincingly in terms of him not having total control of his body. And like similar to Hoffman, you have to give DayLewis credit for the sort of transformation and for being consistent and for being and actually looking and acting like a guy who doesn't have, who has this disability, from an actor who doesn't. But the genius still of the performance is DayLewis not only doing sort of the trick, which is doing all the sort of physical movements, but also capturing the emotion of this man, of this character, imagining what and learning, what this man or someone with this disease, what would be their sort of internal conflict? What would be their struggle? And that being the struggle of the movie. The fact that they want to be independent and they want to be on their own. They don't want to feel like a baby and feel pampered. So they're sometimes jerk-like, or they want their own freedom, so they push people away, but then still getting frustrated from the fact that they still ultimately do need the people because they can't do what they want to do. And that lack of freedom and lack of choice has sort of internal drama and battle within the person. And DayLewis is able to communicate that through his character and through his performance. Not only the sort of wow factor of, oh, this is a man who's able-bodied playing someone who has this disease very convincingly, but then also communicate the emotional conflict of this man and someone with this condition. So that sort of back and forth, and able to to achieve both is incredible. So for me, this is an A-tier performance from one of our best actors of all time. But that's about it, guys. There's the list. Take a look at it. Better than last week with the 90s, coming back to the 2000s and 2010s now with 3 S-tier stuff. I mean, Robert De Niro, Gordon Gekko, F. Murray Abraham, a personal favorite in something like Amadeus. Awesome performances. So please comment below, let me know your thoughts on this episode and of the 80s Best Actor winners. Was it a good one? Next week, once again, we'll be talking about one of the best decades of American cinema, the 1970s. Talk about the Best Actor winners from that decade before we eventually transition into the Best Lead Actress category rankings in the 2010s, but we're not there yet. So that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.